Hello and welcome to the Critical Thinking Tools podcast. Let me introduce this series by first saying who I am and why I decided to make this podcast. I am Lawrence Batias. I am a psychologist at Portsmouth University. I'm an academic psychologist, memory researcher, and one of my interests for many, many years has been distinguishing between science and pseudoscience and between good knowledge and ideology and so on. Critical thinking, in other words. Now, I decided to put this podcast series together because I was interested in creating something for my first year university students who were coming in very well educated from their A-levels in the UK, and also thinking about my former students in the US as well. These students were coming in quite full of knowledge from all the different knowledge areas that they learned in their schooling, but some of them have not heard of the Enlightenment, some of them have not learned how to distinguish science from pseudoscience, haven't heard of falsifiability or Karl Popper, and just are lacking in a full set of critical thinking tools. They have a general kind of skepticism without any fully formed tools. So I thought I may fill that gap in order to help young people and older people. Anybody can listen to this podcast. In fact, I didn't learn these tools until I got into my 30s, and maybe some academics don't even know these critical thinking tools today. I don't know. So it is for everybody, but just bear in mind that I had first-year students in mind when I was creating this podcast series. And I think this podcast series will help young people navigate some of the terrible ideas that they will come across in university and on the internet. Navigate through the bad ideas and be able to pick out the good ideas, because the young students are going to be bombarded with lots of good and bad ideas in the next few years at university. Using these tools can also help young people avoid harmful treatments or harmful ideologies. It's a very important time in people's lives from age 18 to 25 where their whole life can turn for the worst if they don't have good critical thinking skills and don't have their eye on falsifiability and identifying extreme ideologies. And on the other hand, if they do have good critical thinking skills, they can make a series of good decisions that leads to great success in their life. For me personally, these critical thinking skills completely turned my life around between the years of 2007 and 2010, and then I went to graduate school, and then I became an academic. Okay, thank you. I hope you enjoy the series.
Imagine you are a prisoner in a cave. You are chained, your neck is chained so that you can only look forward. You cannot move, but also imagine that you do not know that you are a prisoner. You have been in this position all of your life, and ahead of you, you can see what you think is reality, which are the shadows on the cave wall. That's all you know, and that's what you think is the extent of truth in the world. This is Plato's allegory of a cave. If you picture in your mind's eye a cave with individuals chained near the front of the cave so that they can only see the cave wall and the shadows that are projected onto the cave walls, then imagine behind them there are individuals holding up forms and making shadows on the wall, and the source of the light is a fire in the cave behind them. And imagine a steep climb out of the cave, and outside, of course, is reality. It's the trees, the real forms, the sun, and all of the things that are true in nature are out there. This was, according to Plato in his book The Republic, a dialogue between Socrates and his student Glaucon, where Socrates, through using questions, asks about what the experience would be like to be in the cave. So what would you think to be true? Would you know about the true forms in the world? It's an age-old allegory that helps people think about maybe there is more to the truth than what is immediately in front of you. Maybe you have to change perspectives and move and search to find the truth. Of course, those imprisoned in the cave do not know that they are not seeing the full extent of the truth. Now, the story goes that one day one of these prisoners is unchained and taken out towards the entrance of the cave, towards the fire. And as they turn around, of course, the light coming from the fire is going to be so much brighter than what they're accustomed to, so they're going to be disorientated, confused, and looking quite crazy as they turn around and face the truth. They're going to be uncertain about themselves. It's going to feel very uncomfortable to face what might be true, but what they're not accustomed to. And of course, this is an allegory to how we might feel if we come across new information that goes against what we have been shown or taught all our life. So the person is disoriented, but they slowly start to see the truth of the individuals who are holding up the forms for the prisoners. These individuals, we don't know what their motive is. Do they want to present an image to the prisoners? In any case, it's obviously a different tier of person who is holding up these forms and kind of passing on what they want the prisoners to believe. So the individual who's freed is disoriented, very uncomfortable with what they're seeing. And then the next stage is somebody, after he or she becomes accustomed with this new truth that they have seen, still disoriented, hardly able to comprehend or believe it, they are then led up a steep hill out of the cave. And as they start to emerge from the cave, of course, again, they are disoriented. They are confused, they are feeling very uncomfortable about the new sensations that they're feeling from the bright sun, but also confused and overwhelmed by the truth that they're seeing about there being real nature outside the trees. They see the true forms of what trees actually are rather than just shadows of them as they've been seen all their life. They see the forms of animals that are real in 3D instead of just shadows of animals. So they come to learn that what they've been seeing are images, not the actual real truth. And the interesting part of the story is what will happen if the prisoner goes back down and tells the other prisoners about this. So imagine that the prisoner is taken back down to the cave and chained up again, perhaps, introduced back to the prisoners who can only see the shadows on the wall. How is he going to appear to the other prisoners as he tells them about what he has seen in truth, right? So he's seen how the shadows are being produced. Are they going to perceive that as being crazy? Of course, as he comes back and his eyes are readjusting to the light, he's going to look disoriented and maybe look a little bit crazy. He's going to sound crazy when he tells them about the real forms outside of the cave, and so on. So this is an allegory of how it might sometimes appear that if a lot of individuals are all seeing the same shadows on the wall, you go outside of the box, if you get outside of Plato's cave and then come back and try and explain it to them, you might be surprised how little they believe, or how difficult it is, at least, to persuade them that there is more to see. So this is a useful allegory that is one of the basic tools that you can use in skepticism to think that there may be some truth out there that you need to actively seek out that may be just different from what you have been told in the given culture that you are in, or different to received wisdom. And the power of this allegory in history is that it seems to accompany great steps forward in scientific thinking and skepticism. For example, the line of philosophers who learnt this allegory from Socrates down to Plato and then on to Aristotle, and then Plato's and Aristotle's school taught a whole bunch of very fruitful philosophers who made quite good progress in philosophy, science, and mathematics. Why is it that this tool helps so much? Well, it's the idea that what we think might be true may need questioning. There's a sense that you have to actively go and find information. And this allegory in the past has been interpreted politically, so the idea that maybe the political parties of the time in Athens were telling certain stories that you have to be skeptical of because they might be sophists, or they might be rhetorical in their argument. There might be a truth behind the rhetoric, let's say. It can be seen as a political allegory today too, so are media sources that are politically biased holding up these shadows for the populace to follow and be locked in their cave. How do you get out of the cave? If in that case, well, you might have to look at other media and check data directly, right? So, the kind of data, the raw data might be something that you check rather than just going to a political news source, for example. But it's also being interpreted in terms of knowledge, right? So outside the realm of politics, maybe what we think is true is what we see in front of us, the shadows on the wall. But the real truth might need quite a lot of work and careful thought and oppositional thought to find out. And with the full knowledge that the new truths that we do uncover through careful investigation in science or knowledge building, or it could be in the humanities, in history, or in economics, those new truths that we come up with might be very much resisted by those who are still looking at the shadows on the wall. So I think it can be used as an important grounding tool for students to know about, to think carefully about whether they are being given information that is biased in some way because, the middlemen, the people holding up the forms to make the shadows, maybe they want you to believe a certain thing. That could happen in academia if you have a professor who wants to inculcate the students to believe a certain idea that they believe. The professor might hold up certain evidence as to cast a shadow, but not ever tell you in the full 3 or 4 years that you're at university about disconfirming evidence about things that they don't want you to know about, right? So just having this allegory in your mind, just having the idea that if you are staring at screens, whether it be a social media screen or the shadows in a cave, you may not be getting the full picture. And what's remarkable about this allegory is it seems always to be relevant no matter what culture you're in. So, of course, it's relevant in Athens because of all the sophistry and rhetoric from politicians and the courts and so on, with science having a different approach to truth. And I think this allegory of the cave is kind of part of the birth of scientific thinking. The idea that the truth is more important and it's out there, it's difficult to get to. The truth is more important than the illusion that you might be seeing, right? So it applies to Athens in Plato's and Socrates' time. It also applies to the time when it was rediscovered in Rome. It also applies to the time when this allegory was rediscovered again in the Enlightenment, right? So in the Enlightenment, perhaps you might think that church and state together as one block were projecting the truth onto the walls for people to believe. And there's kind of a prison of belief in that situation. the allegory is all about being a prisoner to belief that is not the whole truth. And of course, thinking of this allegory in this way makes one want to escape from the prison of belief, and that leads to discovery, right? So it leads to you wanting and being very motivated to learn about alternative theories, alternative hypotheses, and you want to see the data for yourself. And getting out of the cave, one way to get out of the cave is to look at data yourself. In the modern age, this allegory applies too, right? So in very surprising ways, given it was written so long ago, what about social media bubbles on Facebook or on YouTube or on Twitter, right? So that is like the projection of images on a cave. So, for example, you go onto YouTube, you click on a very contentious idea, I don't know, something about flat Earth maybe, or maybe something about dissociative identity disorder, or something else that has some problems in its lack of empiricism, in its lack of data. You click on one, and then on the right-hand side, a whole bunch of other videos full of misinformation are going to appear. And you get into a social media bubble where the algorithm calculates what you're most likely to be engaged with for a long time. And that's going to be something that matches your prior beliefs, right? So you can get stuck in these social media bubbles, like being a prisoner of belief in a cave, and become more and more convinced of the truth of the shadows that people are presenting to you on the screen. Because social media algorithms are written to maximize engagement, not to maximize truth. There you have it. I hope you found this allegory interesting. I had in mind the audience for this is people who have not heard about the allegory before. Some of very bright students that they have just not had time to learn about some of the history of skepticism. And there's a little bit of a gap in knowing about ancient Greek philosophy. There's a gap in knowing about the Enlightenment, the rebirth of skepticism in the Enlightenment. And there's a little bit of a gap in distinguishing between science and pseudoscience. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and do not be a prisoner of belief.